Her husband went missing 20 years ago. No body. No answers. Just silence. She raised 4 children alone in a wheelchair, holding on to nothing but hope. Now, after 2 decades of heartbreak and questions, his family finally learned the truth, and nothing could have prepared them for what they found. Welcome to Minority Struggles. If this story touched you, please hit the subscribe button and let me know where you're listening from and what time is right now. Now, let's hear the story. It had been 20 years since Ruth Langston last saw her husband's face. She remembered that morning too clearly for comfort. The kids were arguing over who got the last waffle. Clarence was teasing Maya about her bedhead, and Ruth, already seated in her wheelchair at the table, was giving Corey one of her sharp mama looks for trying to sneak a cookie before breakfast. It was a normal day. Clarence kissed her forehead before he left, said he'd be back after stopping by the hardware store. Said he loved her. He never came back. Back then, Ruth was still adjusting to her paralysis, the result of a car accident 2 years prior. Clarence had been her everything. The one who carried her to bed when she was too tired, who fixed the ramp to the porch, who held her hand when the pain flared so badly she couldn't even speak. And most of all, he was a father like no other. Their kids, 4 of them, were growing up fast. Corey was 17, always hungry and always testing her patience. Jamal, 16, was quieter, more sensitive, too much like her. Tiana had just turned 15, sharp-tongued and smarter than any of them. And little Maya was 13, still clinging to childhood, but already watching the world with wary eyes. When Clarence disappeared, it shattered them. At first, Ruth thought maybe something happened on the road. A car accident. A robbery. She called the police within hours. They filed a report, asked their questions, nodded sympathetically, but they didn't take it seriously. No sign of foul play, they said. Maybe he ran off. Ran off? Clarence? He'd fought beside her when the insurance company tried to cancel her coverage. He'd quit his second job just to be home more with the kids. He didn't run. Not from anything. The worst part? Ruth knew something was wrong. Knew it in her bones. Clarence had been worried the week before. Agitated. He thought she didn't notice, but she always noticed. He'd been hiding something. And when the calls started, unknown numbers, heavy silence on the other end of the line, her stomach turned cold. It wasn't long before the threats came. He owed us. He ran out on a debt, the man said once in a voicemail before hanging up. The police traced the number to a burner. Nothing came of it. Over time, the case went cold. The world moved on. Ruth didn't. She raised the kids the best she could. From her wheelchair, she attended their school plays, yelled at their report cards, made every meal they'd ever eaten. They grew up resentful, protective, confused. Corey turned to the streets for a while, angry and quick-tempered. Jamal stayed home, took on responsibilities no teenager should. Tiana built walls nobody could climb. And Maya, quiet Maya, she just stopped talking about her father altogether. Now, 20 years later, Ruth sat in her living room. An older version of the woman Clarence had kissed goodbye. Her hands were thinner, her hair grayer, but her eyes were just as fierce. She never remarried, never even considered it. Mom, Maya's voice broke through her thoughts. She was 33 now, a school counselor with soft eyes and a tired smile. You've been staring at that picture again. Ruth blinked. The photo was still in her lap, an old one, dog-eared, of Clarence sitting on the porch with all 4 kids piled on top of him like puppies. He looked so alive, so full of joy. I wasn't staring, Ruth said softly. I was remembering. I talked to someone today, Maya said carefully, a friend in the city. He's a journalist now. He said there's been a federal investigation into a loan sharking ring. One of the families being looked into, the name came up. Doss. Ruth stiffened. That name still clawed at her like broken glass. Doss. I thought they were gone, she whispered. No, Maya said. They're not. Harvey Doss is still alive. Took over the operation after his father Walter passed. But Mom, listen, the FBI thinks the operation spans multiple states. They've got whistleblowers coming forward. People who were forced into labor. People who disappeared. Something cold bloomed in Ruth's chest. Do they think he's alive? She asked, her voice almost breaking. Do they think Clarence is? They don't know, Maya said. But they found people after decades. alive, forced to work in remote sites, hidden in plain sight. That night, Ruth didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling of her bedroom, remembering every warning Clarence gave her that week before he vanished. He'd said, "We're going to be fine, Ruth. Just give me a few more days. I got this handled." And she believed him like a fool. He had gone to the Doss family for help. That much she learned later in whispers, alone to cover her rising medical bills. Alone with teeth. Clarence hadn't told her the full truth. He'd tried to protect her, and in doing so, he'd vanished. The next morning, Corey arrived at the house with Jamal. Both were grown men now, Corey working construction jobs and Jamal running his own mechanic shop. Corey's jaw tensed when Maya told him what she'd found. "We're reopening this," he said. "We never should have let it go cold." "What were we supposed to do?" Tiana asked. She arrived shortly after, in a tailored blazer, heels clicking across the floor. "Dig up a 20-year-old loan shark and ask if he kidnapped our father?" "Yes," Ruth said. Her voice was so quiet, it silenced the room. "That's exactly what we're going to do." They looked at her, shocked. "Your father didn't leave us. He was taken. He was tortured. And if he's still alive, I need to bring him home before I die." Nobody argued. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the old oak tree Clarence had planted when Corey was born. Ruth wheeled herself to the window and stared out at the yard. It looked the same, but everything had changed. For 20 years, they'd mourned a ghost. Now, they were going to chase the truth. 2 weeks later, Ruth sat in the passenger seat of Corey's truck, her wheelchair folded in the back. They were driving through Mississippi, one of several states where Harvey Doss's criminal operations had reportedly taken root. It was the first time Ruth had left Georgia in nearly 2 decades. Corey hadn't spoken much. His hands gripped the wheel tight. Guilt hung over him like a shadow. He'd always blamed himself. He was the oldest. He should have done more. That was the lie he carried. "Mom," he finally said, eyes still on the road. "Why didn't you tell us about the loan?" Ruth turned her gaze out the window. "Your father made me promise. He said he'd fix it, that it'd just embarrass you kids. He didn't want you knowing your mother was drowning." "You weren't drowning," Corey muttered. "You were surviving." They passed a billboard. "Wanted. Information on human trafficking." It made Ruth's heart clench. So many stories like hers. So many families torn open and left bleeding with nobody to stitch them back together. They reached the rural compound by late afternoon. It had been abandoned for years, but federal documents hinted it was once used by the Doss family to house workers. People kidnapped, coerced, or too poor to say no. The area had been raided last winter. Several missing persons were recovered, but Clarence's name hadn't come up. Still, Ruth had to see it. The front gate hung crooked, vines strangling the fence. Jamal met them there with a flashlight and a crowbar. The siblings were silent as they helped Ruth out of the truck and onto the gravel. She rolled herself forward, heart pounding. Inside, the place smelled of mildew and rot. Peeling wallpaper, metal cots, rusted hand tools, and in the back building, rows of small rooms, each with a steel bolt on the outside. Prison cells. "People lived in here," Jamal whispered. "Not lived," Corey said darkly. "Survived." They found a name etched into the concrete wall of one of the cells. "CL." Ruth's breath caught. She reached out and ran her fingers across the carving, her eyes flooding. "Clarence Langston," she whispered. "He's been here," Jamal said, voice shaking. "Not just been," Corey added. "He was held here." Ruth pulled something from her pocket, a laminated copy of Clarence's missing persons poster. She stared at it, her thumb brushing over the date. It had been 20 years, but she could still feel his hand in hers. Still hear his laugh. Still see the way he looked at her like she was the center of the world. "They tortured them," Jamal said softly. "They made them work for nothing, day and night. Why hasn't the FBI found him?" Corey asked bitterly. "Because they don't want to," Ruth said, her voice hard. "They closed our file years ago, the moment they assumed he left voluntarily." Tiana and Maya arrived the next morning. Tiana brought printouts, records, case files, redacted reports. Maya had made contact with a former worker named Franklin who'd escaped the Doss network in 2019. He agreed to meet. Franklin was in his 60s now, missing 2 fingers and walking with a limp. They met him at a small diner. His eyes widened when he saw Ruth's photo of Clarence. "Yeah," he said after a long pause. "I remember him." "You're sure?" Tiana asked, her pen frozen over her notebook. "Quiet man," Franklin said. "Never talked much. Used to work the furnaces. Kept to himself. But he helped me once. I was sick, fever. They was gonna leave me out to die. He brought me water. Snuck me scraps. Said his name was C. Just C. Do you know if he's alive?" Ruth asked, barely able to get the words out. Franklin hesitated. "They moved some of us north. I escaped in Kentucky. Last I saw him was 10 years ago." Ruth looked at her children. She didn't need to say anything. They were going north. The trail led them from Mississippi to Tennessee, then to Kentucky, and finally to a quiet stretch of land outside Columbus, Ohio, another Doss-owned property recently shut down after a federal sting. It was bigger than the others. Ruth felt it in her bones. They found another clue there, a work badge water-damaged and half-rotted, buried behind the main shed. The name was gone, but the photo, though faded and wrinkled, was unmistakable. Clarence. Tiana broke down sobbing. Maya knelt beside her mother, hand wrapped tightly in hers. "He's alive," Ruth whispered. "He made it this far. We're close." They brought the photo to the FBI. The agent, young, white, polite, took one glance and said, "Sorry, ma'am. That doesn't prove anything." Ruth slammed her palm on the desk. "You listen to me. That's my husband. He was kidnapped. He was enslaved. And you people ignored us because we were black and poor, and you assumed he ran." "Ma'am, I understand." "No, you don't," Ruth snapped. "You never did." Corey stepped in. "We're not asking anymore. We're warning you. The media is going to hear this. I've already got a journalist friend working the story." That finally got their attention. Within days, the Langston story went viral. Local outlets picked it up first, then a national podcast, then a CNN segment. Photos of Clarence flooded the internet. And one day, out of nowhere, an anonymous tip came in. A man matching Clarence's description had been seen working maintenance at a Doss-owned scrapyard in Detroit. He was alive, and Ruth wasn't going to wait another day. The days after Corey's unexpected visit passed in uneasy silence. Ruth sat in the living room, wheeling herself from window to window every hour, as if expecting Clarence to walk up the driveway. But she knew better. Her husband had vanished 20 years ago. He wasn't just going to stroll in like he forgot the milk. Not unless something in Corey's eyes, his hesitation, meant more than he let on. Maya was the first to say it. "Why is everyone pretending Dad's dead?" she asked quietly one evening. "We never had a funeral." Jamal, slouched on the couch with a bowl of cereal, gave her a sharp look. "Because there's nothing to bury." Tiana, now 25 and a rising civil rights lawyer, glanced up from her laptop. "There's no death certificate either. Just a missing person report filed by Mom. And that was nearly 6 months after he disappeared." Ruth said nothing. Her hand froze around the armrest of her wheelchair, heart knocking. Tiana continued. "You told us he went out to run errands and never came back. But we never really looked for him. Not properly." "Why?" Jamal stood up, uneasy. "Come on, not this again." "No." Tiana pressed. "We need to talk about this. You were 17, Jamal. You remember the most. You said he left in a hurry, stressed out. You saw him on the phone yelling. What was that about?" "I don't know," Jamal muttered. "He had money problems. That's all I knew." "But we were poor," Maya said. "We're still poor. If he was in debt, who was he borrowing from?" Silence. Ruth closed her eyes. She thought they'd stopped asking questions. She thought 20 years of exhaustion, of barely making rent, of living in a wheelchair after that second fall had erased their need for answers. But kids remember things, even when you wish they didn't. "It was a man named Walter Doss," Ruth finally said. The room fell still. She spoke slowly, carefully, her voice hoarse. "Walter ran a loan business in town back then. Not a real one. He lent cash to people who couldn't get bank loans. Clarence went to him to pay off some emergency hospital bills when Corey got sick. I begged him not to, but we had no other option." Jamal's jaw tightened. "You never told us. Because I didn't want you involved." She looked at each of them. Doss wasn't just a loan shark. He ran an operation. People who owed him disappeared, got hurt, And your father, he was scared. He told me once, if anything happens to me, protect the kids. Don't go digging. So I didn't. I stopped asking. I did what he asked. Maya's lip trembled. So, what if he didn't leave us? What if they did something to him? Tiana slammed her laptop shut. We're going to find out. No, Ruth snapped. You will not go near them. But it was already too late. Something had awakened in them. The next morning, Tiana was on the phone with a private investigator. Jamal called one of his old friends who worked in city records. Maya and Corey scoured the internet. And Corey hadn't said much since he came back. But Ruth could tell. He knew something. Later that night, when the younger siblings had gone to bed, Ruth wheeled into the kitchen where Corey stood washing dishes. You saw something, she said. He didn't answer. Tell me. He turned slowly, drying his hands. I went to the old yard on 7th Street, the one where Dad used to work weekends. It's abandoned now, but I saw fresh tire tracks and security cameras, industrial grade. You think? I know they're still using it for something, Corey said. I'm not going back there. Not alone, but someone's cleaning that place. Someone's hiding something. Ruth's heart sank. Then Corey added, the name on the locked fence wasn't Walter Doss anymore. It was Harvey. Ruth gripped the edge of the counter. Harvey, his son. Corey nodded. The name on the sign said Harvey Doss Holdings. It's the same damn family. Ruth couldn't breathe for a moment. 20 years. And the same bloodline still ran the same business, quietly, under a new name. Clarence hadn't disappeared. He had been erased. Don't go back there, she said. Corey looked down at her. You know I have to. She didn't sleep that night. Tiana found old court records, sealed settlements, missing persons linked to the Doss family, but no convictions. She found one witness who had filed a complaint in 2004. A woman whose brother had vanished after failing to pay Walter Doss back. She died in a car crash 3 months later. No foul play was ever proven. By the weekend, Ruth knew she couldn't stop them. So she made one final call. Not to the police. Not to a lawyer. She called someone else. A friend of Clarence's. A man who had once worked with him in construction. A man who owed her a favor and had long since gone quiet. Your husband, he said after a long pause. He didn't just vanish. Ruth's hand trembled. You know something? I didn't say that, he replied. But if I were you, I'd tell your kids to stay far away from the Doss name. They're still in business. Still dangerous. And Harvey, what about him? He's worse than his father ever was. Ruth didn't sleep that night. Her wheels creaked faintly against the wooden floor as she rolled from the living room to the kitchen, then back again. The old clock in the hallway ticked louder in the silence, reminding her how late it was. The kids were asleep. Well, she hoped they were, but Ruth's heart had learned to recognize when the air in the house was wrong. And tonight it was heavy. It had been nearly 20 years since Clarence vanished. The pain hadn't dulled with time. It had simply shifted shape, moving from raw agony to an ever-present ache that clung to her chest like damp cloth. And now, it was creeping back to the surface. Corey had stormed out earlier after accusing his mother of not trying hard enough. You stopped looking, he'd said. But Ruth never stopped. She just got quieter about it. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders and looked again at the stack of worn folders on the table. Detective reports, grainy photos, notes scribbled in her own handwriting, some barely legible after years of being rewritten and reread. Every dead end was cataloged in that pile. Tiana had left her a note earlier in the day. Asterisk, Mama, please eat something today. Asterisk, Ruth hadn't touched her food. Not because she was trying to be dramatic, but because her stomach had been in knots since Corey found that old flyer in the mail. Ruth's mind replayed the morning over and over. Corey, slamming the paper on the table. Why is this even here, huh? Why are they still sending this? It's been 20 years, Mom. Ruth had stared at the flyer. It was a missing person notice. Not for Clarence, but for another man in a nearby town who vanished under similar circumstances. The flyer had reopened a door in her that never fully closed. And then Jamal, her second son, had found something on his own. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, he crept downstairs with a look of confusion and fear. Mama, he whispered, Do you remember that man who used to visit Dad at night? The one who always came alone, real late. Ruth turned to face him. She remembered. Harvey Doss. Harvey had always unsettled her. Even before Clarence disappeared, something about that man felt predatory. He wore expensive clothes, but had the manners of a debt collector. He smiled too wide, talked too slick. And Clarence, he always stood tenser when Harvey was around. Ruth remembered Clarence brushing her off once when she asked. It's just business, he'd said. I owed his father. That's all. But it wasn't all. It never was. Jamal sat beside her now, rubbing his fingers nervously. I think he threatened Dad, he said. I think he told him to do something, or else. I was only little, but I remember hearing yelling. Like real bad yelling. Ruth felt her throat tighten. She rolled to the window and stared out into the night. In the reflection, her face looked older than she remembered. Her hair was thinner, streaked with silver. Her hands trembled more now. But her mind? Her mind was on fire. If Harvey Doss had anything to do with Clarence's disappearance, then she'd finally have a lead. The next morning, Ruth made a phone call she hadn't made in years. She rang Marcus Bell, the one retired detective who never treated her like a hysterical woman in a wheelchair. He picked up after 2 rings. Ruth, he said, his voice groggy but alert. It's been a while. I need you, she said. Something's come up. They met at a diner outside of town. Ruth hated being seen in public. People stared at her chair before they saw her, but Marcus treated her like nothing had changed. Over lukewarm coffee and 2 salty fries, she laid it all out. The flyer, Jamal's memory, Harvey Doss's visits, and her growing certainty that this wasn't a disappearance. It was a silencing. Marcus scribbled on a notepad while she spoke. Walter Doss died 10 years ago, he muttered. And Harvey inherited everything, including the underground stuff his father used to run. I remember rumors, something about labor rackets, private farms, illegal crews, nothing provable. What if Clarence got caught in it? Ruth said, what if he was forced to work? Or worse? Marcus looked at her, his brows knitting together. Then we're dealing with something bigger than a missing person. We're talking about trafficking, enslavement. The word hung in the air like smoke. Ruth knew what she had to do. She had spent 20 years believing Clarence might be dead. But this gave her a reason to act. If he was still alive, if he was being held somewhere, working against his will, they had to move. Marcus promised to start digging. Discreetly. If Harvey's still operating, he said, he won't like being watched. Ruth went home that evening with something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. She sat her kids down, Corey, Jamal, Tiana, Maya, and told them everything. No more secrets. No more pretending she was too tired or too broken to lead this fight. We're going to find your father, she said. Even if we have to tear down every brick of the Doss empire to do it. The kids were quiet. Corey avoided her gaze at first, but then nodded. Tiana's eyes brimmed with tears. Maya clutched Ruth's hand. And Jamal stood up. Then let's start tonight. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside Ruth Langston's heart. For 2 decades, she had endured the silence, the unknowing, the ache of raising 4 children alone in a wheelchair while the world moved on like her husband never existed. But now, that ache had turned to fire. Her son Corey had done the impossible. He found Clarence. Jamal burst into the living room, soaked to the bone, his face wild with panic. Mom! They're moving him tonight. The warehouse. Harvey's panicking. He knows someone's been asking questions. Ruth's hands trembled on the arms of her chair. You're sure? Tonight, I saw the texts. They're moving everyone, burning records. If we wait, we'll lose him again. Corey grabbed his backpack and flashlight. We're not waiting. We're getting him out. Now. Tiana stood in the hallway, her face pale but determined. You're not going without me. Maya clutched her sister's hand. Or me. No, Ruth said firmly. You 2 stay here with me. If anything happens to your brothers. We're not asking, Mom. Tiana said, tears forming. He's our father too. We deserve to be there. Minutes later, they were in Corey's van, navigating back roads with the headlights off. The warehouse loomed in the distance, surrounded by rusted fences and drowning in shadows. 2 guards smoked by the gate. We can't sneak past that, Jamal whispered. Then we don't sneak, Corey said. We go through. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a flare gun. Tiana's eyes widened. Are you crazy? Just enough to get Dad back. They crept around the side of the compound. A chain-link section had collapsed behind an overgrown hedge. Corey held the branches apart and motioned them through one by one. Inside, the warehouse looked abandoned from the outside, but inside, dim lights flickered. They heard machinery, coughing, distant voices. Ruth's voice came back to Corey in that moment. The nights he couldn't sleep. Your father would never leave you. If he could come home, he would. They slipped through a back door. The inside smelled of metal, sweat, and decay. Lockers lined the hall, each numbered. A man with sunken eyes stumbled past, too broken to notice them. This is a prison, Maya whispered. Corey held a finger to his lips. Up ahead, a room pulsed with fluorescent light. Inside were rows of workbenches, and, at the far end, Clarence Langston. He looked thinner, frielier, his hair now streaked with white. But his posture, even hunched, was unmistakable. He was welding something onto a steel panel. Dad, Corey whispered, but the word caught in his throat. That's him, Jamal said, eyes shining. That's really him. They moved quickly. Corey burst through the door and ran to him. Dad, it's me. Corey. Clarence turned slowly. His face showed disbelief before fear set in. What no? What are you doing here? You have to go. Now. We're not leaving you, Jamal said. We're getting you out. You don't understand. Harvey, he'll kill you. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. We don't have time, Tiana said. Can you walk? Clarence tried to stand but collapsed with a cry. Corey caught him. Legs busted, Clarence muttered. He broke it last month. Didn't set it right. Then we carry you. Jamal and Corey looped Clarence's arms over their shoulders and hoisted him up. The hallway outside was suddenly filled with shouting. They're here. Find them. Go, go, Maya yelled. The kids darted down the hall. Corey and Jamal moved as fast as they could with Clarence between them. Behind them, Harvey's men stormed through the doors. One of them shouted, Stop, or we shoot. A gun cocked. Tiana turned and screamed. And no. Then a sudden blast. Corey had fired the flare gun. The burning projectile flew past the guard and shattered a light fixture, sparks raining down. For a second, everyone ducked. Now, Corey yelled. They sprinted through the side door. Out back, Ruth's wheelchair sat beside the van. She had rolled down the road to meet them. Get him in, she cried. Clarence saw her and broke down. Ruth, my God, I thought I'd never see you again. Hold that until we're safe, she barked. Jamal threw open the van's back doors and helped Corey load Clarence inside. Tiana jumped behind the wheel, hot-wired the ignition, and slammed the gas pedal. Tires screeched as they tore down the gravel road. Bullets pinged off the van's bumper, but they didn't look back. Inside, Clarence coughed violently. Ruth cradled his face with her hands. You're safe now. You're home. But Clarence shook his head. No, we're not safe yet. Harvey won't stop. This is a family operation. You just made enemies you can't imagine. Corey clenched the steering wheel. Then let them come. We're ready now. Clarence looked at his son, tears glistening in his swollen eyes. You look just like I did, the day I got taken. And I swore, Corey said, we'd finish what you couldn't. But as the road unspooled in the van's headlights and sirens blared in the distance, Ruth knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a fight for justice. And for Clarence, finally, freedom. The ride home wasn't peaceful. Not with sirens in the distance and Clarence moaning in pain across the back seat. Corey's hands were trembling on the wheel, every bump in the road sending another jolt through his father's broken body. Tiana sat beside Clarence, whispering reassurances he could barely hear. Jamal stared out the window, jaw clenched, ready to fight again if it came to that. In the front passenger seat, Ruth sat motionless, her knuckles white on her wheelchair sidebars, eyes fixed ahead. 20 years of silence and suffering had finally cracked. But this wasn't relief. It was the beginning of something far bigger than she'd prepared for. They reached the safe house just before dawn, a rundown lodge deep in the woods, once owned by Corey's high school football coach. The windows were boarded up. The air smelled of pine and old secrets. The moment the van stopped, everyone jumped into motion. "Jamal, help me get Dad inside," Corey said. Clarence groaned as they lifted him. Every inch of his body seemed bruised, torn, starved. His beard was overgrown, hair patchy. But worst of all was his leg, swollen, misaligned, wrapped in soiled cloth. "Easy," he whispered. "I'm not dead yet." Ruth wheeled up behind them. "You're home now. That's what matters." They laid him on the old couch. Tiana grabbed blankets while Maya brought a bowl of warm water. Jamal fetched painkillers and antiseptic. "Don't touch that leg," Clarence gasped as they tried to elevate it. "Harvey's men broke it. Kicked it for fun. Never said it right." Corey, he sat beside him. "Then we'll get you a real doctor. We got names. Evidence. Once we go public." Clarence shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand. Harvey isn't scared of exposure. This is a business. A legacy. His father ran it. His uncle ran it. Harvey's just the newest face. You threaten his empire, he'll burn the world down. Then let him come." Ruth snapped, rolling closer. "We've waited 20 years. He's going to learn what that kind of patience turns into." Clarence looked at her for a long time, tears forming in his eyes. "You've changed." "You haven't," she said. "You're still the man I married. Still the father they remember. But we're not broken anymore. We've survived." That day, the family began what Corey called the war room. Jamal and Maya started uploading evidence. Videos, voice memos Clarence had risked his life to record over the years. Tiana drafted a press release. Corey created a burner account and posted the first footage. Grainy clips of enslaved men welding parts under armed guard, and a glimpse of Clarence's bloodied face. It hit Twitter like a wildfire. By sunset, the video had 2 million views. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Langston Justice. Hashtag Enforce Labor. Hashtag DOS Empire Exposed. Local reporters called. Activists rallied. Even national news outlets began to ask questions. And then came the threats. Corey's phone rang. Unknown number. A voice calm and cold. "You want a war? We've played this game longer than you've been alive. Call off your campaign, or we make you disappear, just like Daddy did." He played the voicemail over dinner. No one flinched. "Good," Ruth said. "Now we know they're scared." The next night escalated. A black SUV idled at the edge of the property for 3 hours. At 3:12 a.m., someone shot through the kitchen window. No one was hurt, but it was a message. A warning, or a challenge. Tiana, trembling, loaded a shotgun. "We should leave. We should fight," Corey said. "I'm not risking you," Clarence murmured. "Not again. You don't get to make that decision anymore," Ruth told him. "We're in this together." The family went into lockdown. Every door bolted. Every window boarded. Corey rigged trip alarms in the trees. Jamal set up cameras. Maya wrote a long thread detailing everything they knew and scheduled it for automatic release if they didn't log in every 24 hours. And then, on the 5th day, the FBI showed up. Not local cops. Not some backwoods sheriff. Federal agents in black SUVs, bulletproof vests, and grim expressions. "We've been tracking the Doss family for years," one said. "Your footage gave us everything we needed." Clarence sat upright. "So you're taking him down?" "We're raiding 3 warehouses tonight. But we need your testimony. Public. On the record." Clarence nodded. "You'll have it. Every name. Every scar." The next weeks moved fast. Harvey Doss was arrested in a midnight sting operation, still wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of bourbon. Dozens of men were rescued from forced labor sites. Clarence was hailed as a hero. The Langston family became a symbol of endurance, of truth, of generational pain and unbreakable love. But trauma doesn't vanish with headlines. Clarence couldn't sleep for weeks. Anytime the house creaked, he flinched. He refused to let the lights go out. And sometimes late at night, he cried so softly even Ruth barely heard him. Still, he healed. His leg was set properly. His beard trimmed. Slowly, he began to walk again with a cane. The man who had once been stolen was now a father restored. 1 year later, he stood before a crowd at a civil rights rally. Ruth sat in front, tears in her eyes. Their children flanked him. "My name is Clarence Langston," he said, voice strong despite the tremor. "For 20 years, I was held against my will. But my family never stopped searching, never stopped hoping. And now, I stand before you not just as a survivor, but as proof that evil doesn't win when good refuses to stay silent." The crowd erupted in cheers. Ruth wheeled herself up beside him. He reached down, took her hand. "I told you I'd come back," he whispered. "And I told you," she smiled, "I'd be waiting." They kissed softly, age full of pain and peace. And somewhere in the back, Corey whispered to Maya, "Now that's a happy ending." Maya smiled. Not an ending, just a better chapter. And for the first time in 20 long, brutal years, the Langston family was whole.